Welcome to JCTV Spotlight on the Arts, coming to you from Jefferson City, Missouri. That's the capital of Missouri State. Spotlight on the Arts is endorsed by many artists and art lovers throughout our nation and the world now, with our viewership on YouTube and throughout the different medias. I'm your host, Rick Jey, with you today, and I'm very excited to introduce you to a project that is taking place with the Missouri State Historical Society. And we have those representatives today to cover and fill you in on what's really happening with the new building site taking place in process at the moment. Special guest today, our art historian, curator of art collections at the University of Missouri, Columbia, and the State Historical Society of Missouri, Dr. Joan Stack. Dr. Stack is also an expert on the works of artist Thomas Hart Benton. You may recognize her also by her last name, being that she is the daughter of the renowned Missouri artist Frank Stack, who has been painting Missouri for over 50 years. And Mr. Bob Priddy, president of the board of the State Historical Society of Missouri. Mr. Priddy is the current voice of Across Our Wide Missouri, carried by many stations, networks across the Missouri, and now retired but still recognized as the voice of past Missouri Net News content, now happily retired. Dr. Stack and Mr. Priddy come together today as a working collaboration to share with you some exciting news in reference to the developments with the State Historical Society of Missouri. Who better to represent than the curator of arts and the president of the board. Please join me in a few seconds as we turn to Dr. Stack and Mr. Bob Priddy right here on Spotlight on the Arts. I begin by asking both Dr. Stack and Mr. Priddy to share with us how they became interested in filling their positions and, if possible, their basic duties attached to those positions. Let me first turn to Dr. Joan Stack. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much. It's so nice to be here. And I am from mid-Missouri. I was born in Columbia, Missouri, so I've always been interested in the art that has been created in this state. Right. And I then went to college and found myself drawn to art history. My father was a painter, my mother was an English professor, sort of a way to integrate both the humanities and the art, the interest in art. And I had this fascination with history. And I always was a little bit of a political junkie, so I found that those intersections between art and politics, art and history, were just something that really intrigued me. So I went on and got a PhD in art history at Washington University, and almost immediately upon graduation I got a job at the Museum of Art and Archaeology at the University of Missouri. And from there, after I'd been there about 5 years, I was recruited by Dr. Gary Kramer and asked if I might be interested in curating the art collection at the State Historical Society. Dr. Sid Larson, who many of you may know, he was an associate of Thomas Hart Benton, knew him personally. He had been the curator for many years, and I was hesitant to fill his shoes, but he had retired, and I thought, you know, it's a great collection, it's an exciting collection. I love the work of George Caleb Bingham and Thomas Hart Benton, which are some of the highlights of that collection.
Oh, yes.
So it was really exciting to join the team, and I started in 2006 and have been there ever since.
Excellent. What a combination for a foundation of a career continue on now.
Yeah.
And we can't wait, as a person from the state of Missouri, we can't wait to see the exciting completion of this building and the opening, which we'll cover. Well, Mr. Priddy, please share with us, Mr. Bob Priddy, what has brought you to this position with a career in broadcasting, which we're all familiar with, and now the president of the Missouri State Historical Society.
Well, I'm not a native Missourian. I grew up in Illinois, a very historic state, but it's awash in Abraham Lincoln, so I grew up in the world of Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War. I came to Missouri to go to the School of Journalism at the university, and I haven't been able to escape. But when I was a junior, I think it was, I took a couple of courses. One called History of the American West, taught by Lewis Atherton, who was a former president of the Historical Society and one of the eminent Western historians of his time. And then an English course taught by Dr. John Neihardt, who was an epic poet, who was the author of one of the great books about the American Indian and the religion of the Upper Plains Sioux Indians. And these two guys turned me from being an Eastern-oriented Illinois boy into a Western-looking Missouri fellow. I think I've always had an interest in history. Where it came from, I don't know. But I've always had the interest in history. And as I went along in journalism, I realized I was covering history every day. I was watching people make history every day. And I just kind of grew from there. In 1971, when the state celebrated its sesquicentennial, I came across a couple of books called Missouri Day by Day, written by Floyd Shoemaker, who was the longtime executive secretary of the State Historical Society, and he set forth telling stories that were published in newspapers about things that happened on each day. There were several days he didn't cover in the books, but this was in 1971 when the state was 150 years old, and I thought, you know, I could do some radio programs on a day-by-day historical thing. So I started doing those and used Shoemaker's book as a basis, and then did a lot of extra research and filled in all the gaps. And it was supposed to just last 1 year, and it's been on the air since 1971, still is in many places. And that, my research in Columbia for that radio program led me to contact the executive director of the Historical Society, and the next thing I knew, I was in the society, and then I was on the board, and finally, after 30-some years on the board, they decided it was my turn to be president. So that's how I got there.
Excellent, and you do such a great job in both respects. I'm a listener tuning in every day to see what the news story is. Yeah. And so I respect you for your broadcast content and your excellent voice that we attempt to develop in the school, shall we say, of broadcasting. Well, great. I've been asked by many art lovers to approach Dr. Stack to give her her expert background on artist Thomas Hart Benton and George Caleb Bingham. I would like to extend an invitation, Dr. Stack, to return and speak on both artists, if you would, today.
Oh, that'd be fun, yeah.
Well, both Dr. Stack and Mr. Priddy wish to share the latest news on the 2018-19 construction of a new building that we're all excited about that will house the state of Missouri historical artifacts and treasures, including works by Benton and Bingham. Dr. Stack, can you share with the viewers the timeline and what a visit by our viewers might take in when they do attend the opening and what have you? It's so well put together, great lighting. I can just picture it now.
Oh yeah, it will be now. If you come and visit us, and you can come and see us up until April, is it?
April 19th, I think.
April 19th, we'll be shutting down, but up until then, you can come see us in Ellis Library on the University of Missouri campus. We're in the East Wing on the ground floor, and we have beautiful works by George Caleb Bingham and Thomas Hart Benton on display. We have Thomas Hart Benton's entire Year of Peril series, which deals with World War II. It's pretty powerful stuff. Not pretty pictures, but fascinating pictures. Giant paintings dealing with what was happening during World War II. But the space is a library space. It's not really a museum space. We've done the best we can with the space we have, but the ceilings are low. The artwork sort of dominates the space, but you wish you could step back a little more. You wish the ceilings were higher. You wish the lighting could be higher. And so in the new building, you'll walk in and it will look very much like a gallery that you might find at the Nelson Atkins or the St. Louis Art Museum. It will be a really museum, a state-of-the-art quality space. And we're really looking forward to that. These artworks deserve that. Our artworks have a national and international reputation. We recently showed one of our George Caleb Binghams at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And so some of our Bentons traveled around in a large show that appeared at the Nelson Atkins and at the Milwaukee Museum of Art and at the Amon Carter in Fort Worth. So there's a demand to see these works by especially the Bingham and the Bentons. As many of you may know of the great historical painting dealing with the Missouri Civil War by George Caleb Bingham called General Order Number 11. We have people from around the state come and look to see that painting. We'll be able to really show it off in the new building.
Now, Mr. Priddy, there's more there. So the way I look at art, it has to be inspired by something. So part of this building is a person can not only look at the art, but they can actually see artifacts that you will have collected and it'll be on display. So you can tie in the time frame not only with the art, but also the artifacts. Can you?
Yeah, we're more a document than artifact collection, but we do have we do have a lot of artifacts that we can put on display. Our biggest forte is the records of the people of Missouri. For example, we have 54 million pages of newspapers, Missouri newspapers on microfilm. 4,600 newspapers have been published in Missouri that we have on microfilm in one stage or another. So almost everybody's life in Missouri for the last 200 years or so, since 1808, the first newspaper, is in one way or another probably in our newspaper files. So you can look up the ancestors or just look up the news. And that's what I do a lot of when I'm doing research for books and things, is I'm going through those newspapers. There's 4,600 newspapers that have been published in Missouri since 1808. We have 54 million pages of those newspapers on microfilm, and we're several years behind in some of our microfilming.
I see.
So there's millions more pages that we're going to be adding. We have a lot of journals, diaries, maps, photographs, personal papers. We have personal papers of governors and senators and common ordinary businessmen and not so common ordinary businessmen, so that you can come up there and you can open a box. So I like to say there are ghosts that live in boxes that speak to you sometimes.
Yes,
and so you can read these people's words, you can see their handwriting, you can even feel the emotion sometimes in what they've said, and that makes history much more real to you. I think it's those documents that make history more real even than picking up a spoon or a weapon or something from 200 years ago. If you read someone's actual words, and if you're holding paper that they touched and wrote with, then that makes history a whole lot more personal. And that's our strongest point, is the archives and the files that we have. We have our executive director, Greg Kramer, told us as we're adding things up just to get ready to move, so we know how much we have to move. We have 20,000 cubic feet of manuscript collection stuff. Now, 20,000 cubic feet, that's, if we took all of those papers, we laid them, stacked them edge on edge, we'd cover 10 football fields. That's how much we have in things that people can actually look at and hold and read.
Well, that brings a new excitement to a person can actually go in and view the microfilm or the actual documents and touch base with the past, maybe even some of their relatives or what have you.
Yes, historical societies are prime places for genealogists to come. And we spend a lot of genealogists come in and look through the newspapers and go through some of the family records. They have a lot of family records too, but some people who are related by fourth and fifth cousins to somebody who has any kind of a document in our files is welcome to come and look at them. So we've got so much that we can't keep it all in our confined space that we now have in the basement of the Ellis Library. We'll be able to put more in this new building, but there's still so much that we'll even still have to store a little bit of it off-site. But this will enable us to bring more of that material right under a roof where people can find it instantly when they come to visit us.
What a treasure. Well, Dr. Stack and Mr. Priddy, we've got to take a break. So we'll return with Dr. Stack and Mr. Bob Priddy with more on the Missouri Historical Society. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
You're really not that talented.
You're not attractive.
Too fat.
You're too short.
Too old? Why don't you just give up?
Give up.
Give up.
Just give up.
Welcome back to Spotlight on the Arts. I continue now with our special guest, Dr. Joan Stack and Mr. Bob Priddy, who is here with us today to give us an overview of the exciting news that is taking place with the State Historical Society of Missouri through a window that you can only see right here at JCTV. I turn back to Mr. Priddy before the break. Bob, if I may call you by your first name.
Sure.
We were discussing the roles played by Dr. Stack, you personally, and those who assist you in many capacities. The state of Missouri is a treasure of history, which you describe and have in the last segment. Well, it's just such a treasure. I'm excited to even cover it and have Mr. Priddy and Dr. Stack cover it completely as we attempt to do today. It describes on an informational basis daily, as described across our Wide Missouri program that we want to remind people of, carried by many stations over Missouri. Please, if you can, Mr. Priddy, share with us how these treasures become one of the over 8,000 pieces included in the State Historical Society of Missouri's inventory.
Well, we have the radio program that I've done, which is on the MissouriNet.com website. If anybody doesn't have it on the radio, they can go to the MissouriNet.com and click on the icon and hear that day's show. But a long time ago, I started going up to Columbia to fill in the dates that were missing from this book that I mentioned earlier, and so we've done hundreds of these programs, and they're all archived. There's thousands and thousands of boxes of records, documents, photographs. I think I asked Gerald Hirsch, who's our associate director, to give me a rundown of some of what we have, just to give you an idea. We have almost 20,000 manuscripts, which are journals, books, and things like that. We have 143,000 books. We have 10,500 plus maps, more than 147,000 photographs, 5,200 oral histories, some of which have been transcribed. We have 538 architectural drawings, 538 cubic feet of architectural drawings of buildings and parks and things like that. And that's just in Columbia. We have regional centers in Kansas City, St. Louis, Rolla, and Cape Girardeau and Springfield that people can go to. So we have even more in those places. But we have all of this material in Columbia, and it's all moving out of a space of, I don't exactly know how much, but into a building of 76,000 square feet. And so it's going to be an incredible thing. It covers an entire half block in Columbia.
Oh my.
And it's going to be a building that doesn't just, well, I like to say that we've been in this dark, dull basement at the University Library for more than 100 years. And it's easy to miss seeing it because we're kind of obscured in our entrance is. But this building is going to be a stark reminder that history is important. Abraham Lincoln in 1862 said, "We cannot escape history."
Exactly.
And this building is going to make it obvious that we can't escape history. It's here, it's alive, it's vital, it's exciting, and come in and look at it because we have it, and this is where you're going to learn about it, and it's going to be very interesting. I think a person is better if they have some knowledge of history.
Yes.
I think every journalist has to have a certain amount of history, but I think a citizen owes it to themselves to know their history and know their community's history and how we got to be who we are, or else we'll never be any better.
Excellent, excellent. I agree with you 100%
Thank you.
because it's all part of us. Now, Dr. Stack, if you can, give us your overview on when this is all taking place, where we're at, the part that you play, and anything else you want to cover here in the next few minutes.
One thing I'd like to say is that one thing we'll be able to do in this new building that we can't do presently is we're going to have some smaller galleries that will be focused on some of the other strengths of the society. We know we have Bingham and Benton, and you'll always be able to see those famous paintings, those world-famous paintings. But you can also come in and see elements of our fantastic collection of newspaper and illustration cartoons and drawings. And we have over 15,000 of these things. And so these are really snapshots of history. This is where art and history are really intersecting. We have these wonderful images covering World War I, World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, all of those important moments in our history. At least in the 20th century, we have something dealing with every presidential election.
Yes,
so it's a really interesting way to get into history. Now, people like Mr. Priddy are great historians, and they love to sit down with the documents in the newspapers, but some people work better visually. And coming and looking at editorial cartoons, historical images, is a way into history. And then that might encourage you to then read a book about whatever topic that we introduce to you through these editorial cartoons. So there will be a gallery of editorial cartoons and illustrations. There will be a gallery focused on natural and cultural history of Missouri. And here we will have some of our historic lithographs and engravings by John James Audubon, Carl Bodmer, some of the wonderful portraits of Native Americans from the McKinney and Hall collection or the James Otto Lewis collection. These are 19th century images that were made during diplomatic missions. So some really interesting stuff, interesting aspects of our history. We're always looking for new ways into history, new angles on it. And finally, we'll have a gallery devoted to drawings and works on paper by George Caleb Bingham and Thomas Hart Benton. And we have over 300 works on paper by Thomas Hart Benton, and people don't get to see those very often. We will always have something by Benton on display, and occasionally we have not quite as many Bingham works on paper, more like 30 or 40, but still we'll be bringing those out as well from time to time. So you'll get a broader view of our visual history. You'll be able to see more different things. And of course, we'll always have a new temporary exhibit on display. And in fact, we're planning on opening with a complete collection of Thomas Hart Benton's edition lithographs, including a couple of original lithostones, and people will be able to see the breadth of his work as a printmaker. So that will be kind of exciting.
As a printmaker,
oh, he was a great printmaker.
Oh,
yes, he was.
Well, now you, before we get into this exciting opening, your approach, I'm sure, probably daily or weekly by many artists throughout Missouri and the area. I know a gentleman who's been on the show, Mr. David Plank. He speaks highly of both of you and looks forward to making some of his past available as a history statement. So how does this, I'm sure, does artists just approach you, or historians, I guess, with all these different historical shall we say, interest throughout the state, by city or by county, what have you. It's just, how does that happen?
Well, people like David Plank, who interestingly has given us not only his finished works, but some of his sketches, which I think is really exciting. We get to see how he did sketches of birds and landscapes and different things in preparation for doing a finished image of a bird. He was sort of like a modern-day John James Audubon. He's very interested in representing different birds in their habitat, and so I'm really excited about showing some of these drawings as well as his finished works, so people can understand the process a little better. And also, this would go in our natural and cultural history gallery, because there's all of these wonderful artists who have explored nature through art, and there's almost a scientific bent to their work. Charlie Schwartz, who some people may know, he was a great artist who worked for the Department of Natural Resources. We've got a very large collection of his work, including all of his illustrations for the wild mammals of Missouri. And those will be on display from time to time. Those are amazing things. So we are, you think about art as just an aesthetic experience, but when you come and visit our gallery, you may learn a little bit about science, you'll learn a lot about history. Most of our artwork has some connection to political, economic, social history in some way, our natural history. And so it's a great way to really see the intersections between art and history.
Now, Mr. Priddy, you folks do travel around at different openings. I believe and Mr. Dan Woodward out of Rolla, Missouri, just finished a recapturing or redoing.
Yeah, he restored Sid Larson's mural on the history of the Rolla newspaper and the history of the community.
Yes.
Yeah, I went down there and talked about Sid because I'd known Sid for a long time as a curator of art for the State Historical Society, but he also had done a lot of work with Thomas Hart Benton on the mural in the Capitol and with the mural in the Truman Library. And he was also hired to help restore the Brangwyn murals in the rotunda of the Capitol many years ago. Excellent. So I got to know Sid quite a bit, and I got to tell some Sid stories. But he was one of these people that studied with Benton and was a personal friend of Thomas Hart Benton, so he had some great Benton stories to tell. But he was also a consummate artist himself, as well as a teacher who taught at Columbia College for 40 years or so. So his influence, Benton's influence through him and his influence through generations of artists nationwide are felt in galleries and in homes throughout the world, I guess.
Yes, now Dan Woodward, back to Dan, I believe he has completed the battles west of the Mississippi,
I think
Civil War battles, which is, I attended his a little workshop, not a workshop, but a presentation there at Rolla. Where I got to meet Dan, and so that's quite a community of artists in Rolla, Missouri also. It's just artists throughout Missouri, as you see here on that.
Some people won't read a book about a battle, but they'll look at a painting about a battle and they'll learn from that, or they'll get a general idea of the desperation of a Civil War battle and the significance, who was winning and who was losing. So art can speak sometimes when documents don't really tell people things, and that's one of the values we have with more than 22,000 original pieces of art in our collection, that will more in which will be on Joan will be able to put more and more of these on display throughout the years.
I can't wait to come up and just get lost. Well, I'd like to now, we're about out of time, so we'd like to go ahead and approach the close of the show. I'd like to both ask you for your closing comments. We'll ask Dr. Stack.
Well, I just want to encourage people to come and, as you said, get lost in history. I mean, you can get lost in our art gallery. You can also go upstairs, and I think you may find yourself getting lost in our library or in our newspaper collection. Manuscript collection, of course, you need to request things, and then they bring them out to you. But it can be an exciting thing. One of the connections that some people don't know about is not only do we have all of these wonderful artworks by George Caleb Bingham, but we have over 100 letters in the manuscript collection. So that is a wonderful intersection. And from time to time, we will bring out a Bingham letter and display it next to the artwork. And you do get this, it's almost as if you have some kind of contact with the real man,
yes.
You know, that you experience Bingham not just as an artist, but as a person, and how he understood his own artwork.
And what came from the heart to create that. That's what we talk about a lot.
And it's very exciting. I mean, one of the letters is just devastating. It tells about the death his 2-year-old boy when he was in Washington, D.C. And so you also understand that these are human beings, and they go through all the hardships that anybody goes through. So it's really a way to really get into history and understand it at a deeper level. And of course, art, everybody experiences art in a different way, but I remember once we had the Charlie Schwartzes up, and we had a kid come in, and he was just fascinated, and the kids were drawing after the Charlie Schwartzes, and somebody came up and said, we can never get this kid to pay any attention, he causes so much trouble, and he comes in here and the art just moves him and causes him to really find himself and find a connection. So this is going to be hopefully a great place for the community, a great place for Missourians to come and experience and learn about their history.
And Mr. Priddy, March 6th is, I'll say I have it noted as the Missouri Conference on History at a day at the Capitol. There's a day of history conference that's held in Kansas City this year in March. There's a National History Day Missouri, which is a thing for high school students, a competition for high school students who want to give displays and performances and videos and things about Missouri history. And the winners at the state level will go to a national competition in Washington, D.C. In fact, as we record this, Joan and I just came from the Capitol where we had some of these winners come in and display their things in the rotunda of the Capitol and then meet their legislators, which is a big thing for them. But it's an incredible thing what these young people are able to do to describe history and make history come alive to other people. I might mention that we're going to close our resource center in Columbia the 19th of March so that Joan and others have time to pack. Yes.
And then once the students are gone from the University of Missouri sometime in May, then we'll start moving things 5 blocks into the new building. And what we have is not something you can throw in the back of the family minivan and run over to the other place. So it's going to take us a couple of months to move and then unpack and hang all our pictures and put things in files. So we'll have our grand opening and ribbon cutting on the 10th of August, which is Statehood Day. It'll be the 198th anniversary of Missouri's admission to the Union. And that'll be on August the 10th. So March 19th is the last time you'll be able to go into the Ellis Library as a customer, if you will. And then sometime in July we'll have what we call a soft opening. When we have things enough in order, people can come in. We'll just kind of open the doors. If somebody wanders in, that's fine. But the real dedication is going to be August the 10th. And we'll have a building that will speak to the magnificence and the diversity of Missouri history. This is such an incredibly rich state with history, and we now will have a building that will truly represent that richness and that diversity and that dynamic of the history of the state of Missouri.
Yes. Well, thank you both for being my guests today here on Spotlight on the Arts. It's really inspirational and something to look forward to. I'll be definitely attending that opening day if all health is with me.
Well, we'll be looking for you.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
Well, I'd like to thank also for sharing here on Spotlight on the Arts. I do invite you both to return in the future to keep us informed. And Dr. Stack, to share that knowledge you've stored as we spoke about on Bingham and Benton. So that wraps up another great show here at Spotlight on the Arts. My thanks goes out to JC TV producer Gloria Enlow and crew. And thank you, our viewers, for joining us. Look for more Spotlight on the Arts right here at JC TV. And don't forget YouTube. I'm Rick Jey saying see you next time.